Okay, Assalamu alaikum everyone. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa hlul 'uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. So, what I wanted to talk about today was on the topic of finding peace inside of ourselves and also inside of our lives. As you and I know, our lives don't always work out the way we expect or the way maybe we want or even the way we pray for. Also, things are not always easy. There's a lot of struggle in our life. There's a lot of trials. And so I guess the question is, how do we find internal sort of solace despite external tribulation, external bad weather, I'd say, you can't control the weather, right? But the only thing that you can do is how you navigate the weather. So, for example, it can get very, very cold. I grew up in a place that, had Arctic temperatures in Wisconsin sometimes. But people continue to live. People continue to go to work. People continue to get married. People continue to have children. And so there has to be a way to navigate through the cold, right? How do we work around that? Well, we get we get heating inside of our homes. We get heavy jackets and coats. We get heavy, thick blankets. And so this is the same concept when it comes to the trials of life, that there's going to be trials of, very cold weather. There's going to be trials of storms. But how we navigate that has to do with the shelter that we create, and the blanket, right? The jacket. We can't make it stop raining, right? But we can use an umbrella. So this is the idea. A lot of times within our lives, we want to control the weather. Does that make sense? We look at the rain and we say, I don't want it to rain. I want the sun to come out. I want to be able to control the weather. And that is the wrong approach, because you can scream until you lose your voice at the rain. You can't make it stop. You can't tell it when to rain. No, actually, now I want to rain because I need crops, right? No, now we need rain because it's a drought, or we're having bushfires. Like, I need rain, I know, but I don't want rain this day because I have a picnic that I've planned. We can't do that. And we can tire ourselves out trying to control the weather, but it will never happen. We can't control the uncontrollable parts of our life. And so I think the first part of finding inner peace and finding solace is recognizing I am not in control. I am not in control. That's very difficult for people to accept. That is very scary for some people to accept. Neuroscientists explain that one of the scariest things for the nervous system is uncertainty. It's uncertainty. The nervous system will literally find a way to make up a story, even if it's negative, just to fill in for uncertainty. This is also why we get, they talk about loops of thinking. How many of you know an overthinker? Exactly. I knew everyone would raise their hand. That's, people who ruminate, overthink, they get stuck in mental loops. The reason we get stuck in these mental loops is because the brain, the mind, the nervous system cannot handle uncertainty. And so what the mind does to calm itself down, what the nervous system does is it will loop in order to fill in the blanks. I'm uncertain of what's going to happen with XYZ. I'm uncertain about this person's reaction. What's this person's reaction going to be? What's going to happen with this? What's going to be the result? What's going to be the outcome? And so what I do is, to fill in for that uncertainty, I will actually overthink. I will try to make up a scenario in my mind. Even if the scenario is negative, even if I go, because the problem with overthinking, what ends up happening? Well, do you go to best case scenario? No, usually it's worst case scenario. Why do you think we do that? Do you know why we do that? That's the reason. The reason we go to worst case scenario in our overthinking rumination loop, and this calls there's a part of the brain called the default mode network. This is the rumination center. This is where we daydream. Default mode network isn't by definition a bad thing. Creative thinking comes out of that. This is why sometimes you have your most creative ideas in the shower, or when you're washing dishes, or when you're ironing. Yeah, it's because your default mode network takes over when you're doing a mundane action. But the problem now is when the nervous system is dysregulated, meaning that a person doesn't feel safe, then what happens is the default mode network takes over and basically runs through worst case scenarios. The reason it does that is because it is trying to keep you safe. It's telling you, here's how we're going to prepare. By thinking of the worst thing that can happen, and then we're going to be safe because we're going to prepare for it. This is a trick. This is actually a trauma response. The reason why we do this, and this is where, if we go back to our history. So if in our history, uncertainty meant that something bad might happen, individuals who've experienced trauma, for example, if somebody had a sudden death in the family, or something really bad happens suddenly, especially when you're a child, or maybe there wasn't stability in the home, or there was unpredictable, erratic behavior of a parent where you couldn't predict their mood, or you felt like you were walking on eggshells, or it was a minefield, right? Where certain types of, where you couldn't predict, how they would react. You get what I mean? And so what the nervous system is meant to do is it is wired to protect us. And so what it will do is it will learn certain techniques to keep us safe. And one of those techniques that it learns is to overthink, to go through all of the possible scenarios in order to prepare for the worst and thinking that that will protect you. Now, as you can imagine, that is the opposite of inner peace, right? Because if you're constantly imagining the worst case scenario, your body can never relax. And so you never actually get that inner calm. So now it takes us back to what is the issue here? And that is, I am uncomfortable. I am unable to deal with uncertainty. And so we know what the issue is. But now the question is, how do we address that? So if you look at what science says, so psychologists, neuroscientists will say we have to train the nervous system to be able to handle uncertainty. And there are certain techniques to do that. I mean, you can use, CBT. You can use certain techniques to teach your body that even when things are uncertain, you can still be safe. All right? But where we as believers, where can we find peace even in uncertainty? What do you guys think? When things are uncertain, when you don't know what's going to happen, when you don't know what tomorrow is going to bring, when you don't know how someone's going to react, when you don't know what's going to happen to your loved ones, what's going to be the outcome? Anxiety. You said it. Tawakkul. See, we live in a world where we can't control the external circumstances. A lot of the illusion of control is, again, to make me feel better. But what if we can find peace in knowing that no matter what happens, remember I gave you the example of the really cold weather? How do we deal with the fact that it is freezing outside or sub-zero temperatures? How do we deal with that? We find a shelter that has heat, or we get a really warm jacket. We get a really warm blanket. We cannot predict or control the temperature, the rain, the storms. But what we have to be able to do is to find shelter in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That we can handle uncertainty, knowing that our trust is in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that we don't rely on the illusion that I'm controlling the weather. Does that make sense? And we let go of that illusion. That's not something that is easy, especially, as I said, if we grew up in an unpredictable environment where you just didn't know what to expect. And so it's about teaching your mind and your heart that your shelter is unbreakable, no matter how cold it gets, no matter what life brings, no matter what uncertainty comes to be, is that you have a safe shelter that actually is unbreakable. And that can only be found in our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, how do we build that? How do we build that shelter? I think that, one of the ayat in the Quran that always, to me, it's like a blueprint for how to deal with hard times. And it is something that was revealed. These are ayat that were revealed during the Prophet ﷺ's hard times. It was during a time when he was very afraid, and he was doubting whether Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had abandoned him, whether Allah was angry with him. And this was at the very beginning of the revelation. So he had gotten the revelation of Iqra, the revelation of Al-Mudaththir and Muzammil, right? And then there was a gap. So there was some revelation that had come down, and then there was a gap in the revelation. And during this time, the Quraysh were taunting him and telling him, your Lord's abandoned you, your Lord is angry with you. Look, he's not giving you any more revelation. So what does Allah reveal? Surah Ad-Duha. And Surah Ad-Duha begins by reassuring the Prophet ﷺ. وَالضُّحَى وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا سَجَى مَا وَدَّعَكَ رَبُّكَ وَمَا قَلَى. That your Lord has not abandoned you, nor is he angry with you. So, first of all, Allah reassures the Prophet ﷺ. And then what does Allah do? ما ودعك ربك وما قلى وللآخرة خير لك من الأولى ولسوف يعطيك ربك فترضى. So here now, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about what is to come, the future. When we are going through these overthinking loops, we are worried about what? What are some of the things we worry about? Loss? Okay. Which part of our life are we worried about when we're overthinking? Usually it's the future. Usually it's what's going to happen, right? I'm afraid about what's going to happen. Why? Because what's going to happen is the uncertainty part. And so I am essentially sort of trying to control the unseen. Because the future is unseen, I have no idea what's going to happen. And so what I do is I sit and I think, and sometimes we sit and think that if I just think about this enough, I can control the weather. I can think my way out of the rain. I can plan my way out of anything going wrong. You know what I heard was very interesting? This was another thing that I found really interesting. Is that overthinking is underfeeling. I'll explain what that means, but I want you to think about it for a second. Overthinking is underfeeling. You know what that is? It means there are emotions that I'm avoiding. There are emotions that I am avoiding now, and there are emotions that I am trying desperately to avoid in the future. Can I tell you something that's very interesting about mental health? One of the bedrocks of mental health is the ability to be uncomfortable. Does that make sense? Meaning, I have to learn the capacity to be uncomfortable. When I'm afraid to be uncomfortable, or I try everything to avoid discomfort. What does that mean? It means I don't want to feel disappointed. I do not want to have to feel disappointed. I do not want to have to feel afraid. I do not want to feel, that sad. I don't want to have to feel grief. And because I'm afraid of my own feelings, I will do everything to try to control every aspect of the situation. Does that make sense? People who are called controlling are also suppressors of their emotion. They don't want to feel their emotions. And so it's sort of like a defense mechanism. In order to protect myself from having to feel uncomfortable, I will try to be very, very controlling. Does that make sense? What we have to be able to do, and they talk about it in psychological lingo, it's window of tolerance. So there's a lot of things nowadays about like trigger warning, right? Trigger warning, right? They actually say that it's not about avoiding triggers. Mental health is not avoiding triggers. It's about building and growing the capacity to withstand discomfort. And that capacity is called window of tolerance. And so essentially, mental health is expanding our ability to be uncomfortable sometimes. The ability to be able to tolerate, our window of tolerance is how much can we sit with and process and not try to suppress or escape. Does that make sense? It seems hard. But that's the only way to be healthy, is to have the ability to sit and process and feel even when it's uncomfortable. Vulnerability. There's a lot of work out there, a lot of research out there about true joy can only come when you're willing to be vulnerable. True joy can only come when you're willing to be vulnerable. If you never allow yourself to be vulnerable, you don't get to actually experience true joy. But how are you willing to be vulnerable is that you have to be able to accept that sometimes I'm going to have uncomfortable feelings and it's not going to kill me. I can still be safe. I can be disappointed and still be safe. I can disappoint others and still be safe. That's the hardest one, isn't it? For people pleasers. I can say no and still be safe. I can hold up a boundary and still be safe. These are all parts of training ourselves But this is how we build mental health. This is actually the foundation of mental health, is the ability to sit with our feelings without running away, without trying to escape. And one more thing, without shaming and judging ourselves. So one of the things my teacher used to say is, stop having feelings about your feelings. Do you get what I'm saying? Like, say you're sad about something, but then you beat yourself up. Why are you, get over it? Why are you being sad? Why are you acting like,
You're upset.
why acting, you're upset that you're upset. You're angry that you're sad. You're shaming yourself because you're sad. Say you crying. Say you cry, yeah? And then you're like angry at yourself for crying. You're beating yourself up for crying. Like, you're calling yourself weak. You're saying, you know, or you're angry that you showed vulnerability. You're ashamed. Any idea where that came from? Any idea? It came from childhood. Because this is how we were treated when we showed those emotions. We were shamed, or we were told, stop crying, or we were told, be strong, or we were told, you know, get over it, etc., etc. So what happens is we talk to ourselves the way we were spoken to. So, the connection here is that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to the Prophet alayhi salam, وَلَسَوْفَ يُعْتِيكَ رَبُّكَ فَتَرْضَى. So he's saying that we will verily give to you and you will be pleased. وَلَلْآخِرَةُ خَيْرٌ لَكَ مِنَ الْأُولَى وَلَسَوْفَ يُعْتِيكَ رَبُّكَ فَتَرْضَى. What is to come will be better than what has passed. Okay, first, Allah reassures the Prophet ﷺ that he has not been abandoned, nor is Allah angry. Then he reassures him about the future. Next. وَلَسَوْفَ يُعْتِيكَ رَبُّكَ فَتَرْضَى أَلَمْ يَجِدْكَ يَتِيمًا فَآوَى. Now he is looking at the past. You know, this, by the way, this is an entire encyclopedia, this surah, of basically that blueprint of when I'm struggling. First, Allah reassures us that we are not alone in our struggle. Allah has not abandoned us. And Allah is not angry with us. How many times have we faced hardships and shaitan whispers, well, it's because Allah is angry with you. Or maybe Allah is punishing you. You guys understand what I'm saying? Oh, this bad thing is happening. This hardship is happening because Allah is angry with you. Shaitan will whisper that. Or shaitan will say, oh, it's because of you did this. Or it's because Allah, you know, maybe if it's a very extreme, Allah hates you. Allah has abandoned you. Allah is punishing you. Know that those thoughts are from shaitan. Those thoughts are from shaitan. How do I know that? Because even when Allah gives a hardship to us as believers because of a sin, it's not to punish us. Let me ask you a question. How many of you are parents? Okay, so you know, you're going to know what I'm talking about. When your child does something that's going to hurt them, when your child does something wrong, and you give them a consequence, say, is it to hurt them? Is it because you hate them? Is it because you're really mean? I hope not. No, I mean, we're not abusive, inshallah, human beings. What's the reason?
Protect them.
To protect them, to teach them, to redirect them. Yes? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves us more than a mother loves her child. So even if Allah is giving us a consequence, it's not because He hates us, any more than you as a parent do that because you hate your child. And Allah is high above any analogy. So even the way we think about Allah has to be positive, not negative. If you have a negative thought about Allah, know that that's shaitan trying to deceive you. If you have a negative thought about Allah, like Allah hates you, Allah is angry, Allah's punishing you, Allah's abandoned you, know that that's from shaitan. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَنَا عِنْدَ ظَنِّ عَبْدِ بِهِ. I am as my servant thinks of me. So we have to think positive of Allah. And negative thoughts about Allah are not from Allah, they're from shaitan. So even if I am being given a hardship, even if it's because I made a mistake, even if I did commit a terrible sin, and then I get a hardship as a result, it's to purify me. That's what I have to know. It's to purify me, not because Allah hates me or angry. That's husn al-dhann billah. That's having a positive opinion of Allah. Do you see the difference? It's like your kid, right? When you're giving them a consequence, they're usually going to think, maybe they're going to think that you're trying to ruin their life or something. But are you? No. So having a positive opinion of Allah, looking at the future, and knowing that no matter what uncertainty comes, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has your back. And that Allah, if you're in the shelter of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it actually doesn't matter how cold it is outside. Does that make sense? So let me put it this way. It doesn't make sense to be afraid of the weather. It doesn't make sense to be afraid of the rain or the cold because you have shelter. Does that make sense? And it doesn't make sense to try to control the weather. You're wasting your effort. Instead, what should you do? Like, instead of trying to control what degrees it is outside, what should you do instead? Make sure you have a solid home. Make sure your heating works. Make sure your roof is intact so if it rains, you don't get flooded. That's how you find inner peace. Is that it's not about trying to control the circumstances and the people around you. It's about building the shelter. Building the inner shelter with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And always having a positive opinion of Allah. And having a positive opinion of the future. Not thinking negative about Allah and not thinking negative about the future. Oh, things are hard and it's always going to be hard. It's raining now. It's always going to rain. It's never going to stop. Oh, it's dark right now. The sun is never going to come up again. See, that type of thinking is what actually brings us down. Let me just wrap up there because I do want to, inshallah, open it up for questions. I feel like there's a lot in your heads. Like there's a lot on your minds that you want to maybe say or ask. So I want to leave space for that, inshallah. Subhanakallah wa bihamdik. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. Astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. So if you have any questions or reflections, I'd love to hear it. No judgment. No judgment. Hi. Hi.
Yeah, for real. I'm just gonna go. Thank you.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions or reflections?
Oh, a lot.
Okay, just start. Start us off.
I don't know where to start from. It's as if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sometimes just read your minds and I wish like my son was here. I know.
Oh, how old is your son?
I have two. the one I'm talking about is 15.
Okay.
It's gonna turn 16 in January, so almost 16.
Okay.
But this is the conversation I had with him just yesterday, and it's just amazing. And I brought up Surah Ad-Duha because that's one of my most favorite surahs.
Oh wow.
And I gave him exactly, you know, the same references, not as good as you did right now, but the way you explained, you know, how when one tries to be perfect and to, you know, when it's